Hey, quick correction to my video. In the Betsy DeVos section, I mentioned that her children do not attend public school. I need to correct that and say they did not because they are adults. So there you go, my correction. Thanks. It's been 3 months since the election, and I so wanted Donald Trump to prove me wrong. But every day, he just reinforces every negative thing I believe about him and the people with whom he's surrounding himself. First of all, he appears to have executive order signing disorder, and I don't even believe he knows what is in them. He's just letting someone write them, and he signs off, then holds them up for all of us to see. I mean, is this his form of show and tell? All one needs as proof that he's signing on the line without reading, and we've been told he doesn't like to read, is the atrocious, incompetent way his travel ban was handled recently at airports around the country. Experts weren't consulted. Even General James Mattis and John Kelly were kept out of the loop. Rudy Giuliani, however, and he's admitted as much, was asked to help write the order in such a way that it would be legal. Immigration officials at the airports were given little to no guidance, and yes, as one would expect, chaos ensued. He's also taken belligerent stances with allies like Mexico, Japan, and yes, even Australia. But he sure seems to love Vladimir Putin. Aside from his blatant lies and numerous conflicts of interest, he just can't stand for everything not to be about him. Seriously, at the National Prayer Breakfast, he felt the need to call out Arnold Schwarzenegger and his Apprentice ratings. And his speech regarding Black History Month happened to be all about him too. The word "I" was in that short speech at least 25 times. Even worse, he seemed to have no knowledge of Black history or even who Frederick Douglass was. He mentioned him very vaguely. Mr. Trump's ignorance, narcissism, and belligerence is stunning. I mean, every day. I feel worse about it. Enough about him. Let's talk about the people with whom he's surrounding himself and appointing to cabinet positions. And there are a handful I'm okay with. Generals Mattis and Kelly, I think, will be fine. Experts that I follow in the foreign policy community from the right and the left, and whose judgment I trust, believe they are solid choices. Elaine Chao, I believe, will be okay for the Department of Transportation. And Nikki Haley as ambassador to the UN, while currently she really doesn't have the foreign policy chops, I do believe she is capable of learning and will do the right thing. After all, she did oversee the removal of the Confederate flag at South Carolina State's Capitol, right? So, to the list of people, which I have great concerns, and I'll do a short list here, but the list is really long, but I'll highlight just a few. And topping that list is White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. I mean, he's bad enough as an advisor to Mr. Trump, but making him a principal member of the National Security Council, it just breaches major norms, especially while removing the Director of National Intelligence and the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. In what world is a white nationalist, an anti-Semite, a misogynist, someone who should be anywhere near the Oval Office? And furthermore, this will only lead to more partisan political influence, not less, with regards to advice given the administration and the policies they execute. I could go on forever about that guy, but there are other appointees who have either no experience in the areas they are being asked to lead, or are on record wanting to destroy/disable those agencies. Let's look first at billionaire Betsy DeVos, who was confirmed by the Senate on February 7th to be Secretary of Education. Her family have been huge donors to the GOP for over 40 years, especially in her home state of Michigan. She has never attended or taught in a public school. She's never held elected office, nor do her children attend public school. She has fought for publicly funded private school voucher programs, charter schools, and other elements of the so-called school choice platform. She has pushed policies in the state of Michigan, particularly in the charter system, and they've discovered there's very little accountability. Rules aren't being followed, there's no transparency, and these schools are really underperforming. She has signed no ethics agreements yet for how she plans to resolve any of her conflicts of interest, and this seems to be an ongoing issue with numerous of the nominees in this administration whom they're trying to get put in place. And she has also spoken in the past about advancing a Christian agenda through education, wanting taxpayer dollars to go to religious schools. To this I say no, no, no. She obviously doesn't believe in separation of church and state. Now, I'm all for teaching religion in schools so long as it is a comparative religious studies course, so that students get an overview of many different religions. But pushing one single religion as the right religion, particularly if it's being subsidized with taxpayer dollars and in a public school, no, that can't happen. That should not happen. Next is Ben Carson. While a brilliant neurosurgeon with an inspiring success story, he has no business running HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development. And I'm sorry, but it's true. Why was he chosen? Because he grew up poor? More likely, I think it's because he's Black. Think about it. Housing and urban development. Keyword here being urban. Connotation, inner city, Black people. Sorry if that offends anyone, but it seems like that's why he was chosen for that role. But HUD also supports poor families in rural areas, not just inner cities. Carson has criticized public assistance programs, claiming they aren't compassionate and promote dependency, but he appears to have little understanding of HUD, what it does, how it allocates funds through home financing and affordable housing, or its efforts to address racial and economic diversity in communities that receive federal funding. Again, he has no experience in this field. And that's like me saying, hey, I ran track for 6 years, so I'm qualified to coach the Olympic track team. I've actually had some people argue that I do have more qualifications to do that than Carson has to run HUD. And I kind of agree. Next, Andy Puzder for Secretary of Labor. And he is no friend of labor. He is the CEO of the company that franchises Hardee's and Carl's Jr. fast food restaurants. He's on record opposing raising the minimum wage, Obamacare, extension of overtime, and mandatory sick leave, worker breaks, and probably most worker protections. I mean, who needs them, right? He praises automation to replace employees because robots never take a vacation or show up late. He's also quite a misogynist. I mean, look at the commercials for Carl's Jr. and how they exploit women. They're pretty disgusting. I mean, I have no problem with attractive women wearing bikinis or half naked, whatever. But these are commercials. Kids see these commercials. These women are half dressed, chowing out on burgers this big, and with their legs spread apart. It's appalling. It leaves me speechless and makes me cringe. Oh, and on February 6th, it was revealed that Puzder hired an undocumented maid, which should disqualify him, as it did others before him. Remember Zoe Baird, Bill Clinton's Attorney General nominee, or Linda Chavez, George W. Bush's labor nominee? Both women's nominations were brought down because they hired undocumented workers. But hey, they're women. Puzder's a man. And Republican Congressman from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, doesn't think it's a disqualifier in Puzder's context. In this instance, it seems to be just one big meh. Oh, and then there's Tom Price, who was confirmed at about 2 a.m. on February 10th as Secretary of Health and Human Services. HHS oversees Medicare, Medicaid, Food and Drug Administration, National Institutes of Health, and the Affordable Care Act, which Price is a longtime opponent. He previously served as a congressman, a Republican from Georgia, and has spent much of his time in Congress trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He's a big proponent of high-risk pools, would allow insurers to deny coverage based on pre-existing conditions. He's for block grants for Medicaid, supports health savings accounts, which are fine, but not everyone has money to save. In fact, this is a terrible option for low-income people, doing very little to help them afford medical coverage. These people don't have extra money to put into a 401k, much less an HSA. And Tom Price has actually put a detailed plan out there to replace the Affordable Care Act. I've reviewed some of it, and it seems to be like it'd be a great deal for the young, the healthy, and the rich, but not so great for the old, the sick, and the poor. So we'll talk more of that in a future segment. Then there is Edward Scott Pruitt for the Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Pruitt has been Oklahoma's Attorney General since 2011. He has sued the EPA many times to fight clean air and water rules. Oil and gas companies have been the second biggest campaign contributors to him, and he has sued on their behalf or with them, putting profits over people's health. Lovely. He wants to roll back environmental protections and climate change policies, doesn't believe in the scientific evidence that the rapid rate of climate change over the past several decades is caused by human actions. Although I have heard recently that he's walked that back a little, perhaps maybe to make himself more palatable to those voting to confirm him. The New York Times on February 6 wrote that he is seen to cut the EPA with a scalpel, not a cleaver. But guaranteed, he will do his best to weaken the agency he despises, be it through drastic budget cuts, staffing reductions, or shredding environmental and food and drug safety regulations, or all of the above. I could go on. Steve Mnuchin, Rick Perry, Steve Miller, but I'll stop here. As these confirmation votes proceed, please weigh in with your congressperson and senators by phone or at a town hall meeting if you disagree with them. I hate to be so negative, and I don't expect a Republican administration to put people in charge of agencies who align with my progressive policy prescriptions. However, I do expect competent, knowledgeable, experienced people to head up government agencies, because when they don't, we get incompetent government, we get chaos, and Americans suffer, mostly middle and low income people. Sadly, it seems that this is the GOP playbook. They hate government so much that when they are in charge, they put people in positions of power who have no experience and are incompetent, so that when they fail and there's a disaster, it just reinforces their narrative of government is bad, government can't help you. And it's worked like a charm over the past decades. The American people's faith in government institutions is very low. I don't believe that government alone can solve all our problems, but it is certainly not the evil conservatives have painted it to be, and it is very useful in many situations. Furthermore, it can finance research and push projects forward that private industry can't or won't risk doing. That's it for now. Do I feel better? Not really, but it is important to speak our minds, even if only a few people actually listen to us or care. Because even if we can't stop some of these nominations, at least we can slow them down and people can know who it is who's actually going to be running the country. So I'm going to be hopefully being more positive in the future, as I always try. But until next time, a bientôt.